And hello, everybody. Hello once again from your hairy author friend, me. We are on execution. Alex and Z and Simon and Lucy and a black suit are basically on the run from the army, on their way to try to find Alfred Furness, somewhere near the beach, they think. And they're basically trying to kill him. They've just ended up back at Alex's home. He kind of got drew back there as they were passing through the city. And he's kind of had this moment of, this reunion with his past life, and this very emotional moment. He goes to his bedroom and he finds a photograph on his desk from his parents, basically saying, "I'm sorry, we really tried to get you out of Furnace Penitentiary." He kind of thought they'd abandoned him there, but 7 times they tried to appeal his sentence, and 7 times they failed. So he's had this real kind of moment of revelation, really, that his parents did actually love him, and that last little note that they left. Alex, we're sorry. We forgive you. We hope you'll forgive us too. We love you so much, Mum and Dad. And so he's just had that moment where he realises that his parents have gone. Of course, he doesn't know where they are. So he's just collapsed in his room, absolutely distraught, really. I heard a gentle... Oh, sorry. And this chapter is called Tea, which is obviously... At some point I needed a chapter called Tea, didn't I? Since tea is basically my nectar. Except it doesn't turn me into like a raging berserker. It turns me into a slightly less grumpy middle-aged author. Good old tea. Anyway, tea. I heard a gentle cough from the landing and realised I was no longer on my own. I let the last few sobs fall out, my eyes burning under the pressure of so many tears. I used my sleeve to wipe them, looking up to see a blurred shape in the doorway. I felt suddenly ashamed, clambering to my feet with an embarrassed cough. Sorry, I said, blinking until the figure focused. It was the black suit, his silver gaze like 2 coins embedded in the darkness. I expected him to make some sarcastic comment, to tell me I was weak and pathetic. But instead he just stood there, even more awkward than me. I realised he was wearing a baggy tracksuit that he must have found in another house along the street. His feet were still bare. It wasn't easy finding shoes to fit you when you were a black suit. "You're okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, his voice weak. But still he didn't move. I took a step closer, trying to make out his expression. "You don't look it," I said. "What's wrong?" He ran a hand through his hair. He started, and I could see how hard this was for him. "I think I remember something." "About your life?" I said. He shook his head, but it wasn't a denial, more like he was trying to shake the thought away. His eyes were locked on something on my desk. "That computer," he said. "It's for games, right? I seem to remember playing, only it wasn't me. It couldn't have been me." "Don't fight it," I said. "Let the memories come. They're the only thing that can save you." It was obviously the wrong thing to say, as the black suit's face suddenly tightened, his sneer returning. He wiped his sleeve over his mouth, his teeth flashing. "Save me," he said, his voice filling the room like distant thunder. "You really believe that? Furness already saved me from a weak and pointless life like this. He turned me from a child into a soldier, into a superhuman. You think I'd want to leave this war and return to living like an insect?" He spat on the carpet, but there was still uncertainty in his expression, in the way he blinked too fast, the way his Adam's apple bobbed. Something was growing in him, a seed of a memory, pushing free from the nectar of his mind. Sooner or later, it would bloom. "We leave at dawn," he said. "So if you want some rest, you better get it now." I pushed past him, heading down the stairs and back into the kitchen. Lucy and Z were sharing a packet of raisins that they'd found, washing them down with tea. They both looked half dead, their eyes ringed with shadows. Simon had already given in to sleep, folded over the table with his head in his hands, snoring gently. "You find what you were looking for?" asked Z. I sat down, remembering the photo in my hand and sliding it over the table. Lucy picked it up. "Is this really you?" she asked. smiling at the image of me and my parents. "Look at the back," I said. She turned it over, her hand going to her mouth as she read the words aloud. Z smiled at me. "I knew they weren't as bad as you kept making them out," he said. "You can thank them for this when you see them." I thought of the river of corpses, and I knew I'd never see them again. Not in this lifetime, anyway. There was a slap of feet, and the black suit entered, leaning against the counter. "Nice tags," said Z, nodding approvingly. "Does this mean you're a tracksuit now?" Z. The black suit scowled. "Seriously, though," Z went on, "if you're going to be hanging around with us, then we should at least know your name. You remember what it is?" "We don't need names," said the suit. "Fair enough," said Z. "I guess we'll have to make one up for you. How about Bob? Or Norman? Maybe Algernon?" We could all feel the anger from the black suit boiling up like water, the heat in the room seeming to rise. Z decided not to push his luck, ending with a muttered, "Bob it is then." "Why are you hanging around with us?" Lucy asked. "I mean, days ago you lot were trying to kill us, and now you're here as, what, a bodyguard?" "I'm just following orders," he said, and his contempt was unmistakable. "Alfred Furness made it clear that your compadre here is his new general. That means we have to do what he tells us." Lucy looked at me, one eyebrow raised. "You're his new what?" she asked. "I'm not," I replied. "It's because I killed the warden. I don't know what's going on, but I can tell you this right now. I'm not Furness's general. I never will be. I'm still going to find him, and then I'm going to kill him," I blurted out. "That's the only way this is going to end." I looked at the black suit, worried that I'd said too much. Don't worry," he grinned. "Furness has told me all about your little plan." "So he talks to you too?" I asked him, genuinely curious. I picked up my tea, taking a big sip. It was only lukewarm, but it still tasted like heaven in a cup. I waited for the kick in my guts, for the puking to start, but my system must have just thought it was water because it settled pleasantly in my stomach. "The same way he talks to me, inside your head?" "He gives me my orders," he replied. "That's all there is to it. I'll keep you alive, we all keep you alive, and get you to him." "And then what happens?" I asked. "That's up to Furness," said the suit. "So let me get this straight," said Lucy, talking to me. "Furness knows you want to kill him, and yet for some reason he appoints you his general and does his utmost to help you find him. Something here doesn't add up." She was right, but when I tried to think about it, my head felt weird, like I couldn't get it in gear. It did seem strange that Furness was so desperate to meet me face to face, despite my vow. It was better not to think about it. Thinking could get you killed. I drank the rest of my tea in one go, the taste seeming to wash a little of the confusion away. Lucy's right," said Z, his forehead creasing. "Furness wanted you to go to the tower back in the city. You thought you were going after him then, but instead you had to face the warden. He wanted you to beat Cross. That's exactly how he planned it." "So?" I said. "Furness is clever. He knows what he's doing. If he's making it easy for you to reach him, then there's a reason for that. It's part of his plan. He wasn't in the tower. He might not be waiting for you now, either. Maybe he's leading you there to fight something else, something worse than Cross." "He's there," I said, and I wish I could have been as confident as I sounded. "I'm just saying, that's all." Z slumped back in his chair. "But I already told you," I said. "We don't have a choice." "I know," said Z, "I know, but be careful, Alex. Things might not be what they seem." Quiet held the room for a moment, all of us trying to work out what was going on. I glanced out of the window, saw the tiny backyard there drenched in night, and beyond it the street where I was finally caught by the police. On that night, so long ago, I'd thought that if I could just make it past those cops, back into the kitchen, then everything would be okay. I could forget about what had happened to me and go back to my life. Well, here I was. Surely now the nightmares would go away. All I needed was a plan. But every time I grasped for an idea, it sank back into the fog of my thoughts. "Look, let's just get some sleep," I said, giving up. "Maybe it'll be clearer in the morning." We leave at dawn," the black suit said again. "There's no time to waste. I'll take watch." Thanks, said Lucy. I could tell she meant it. There's a cup of tea there for you if you want it. The suit looked at the steaming mug on the counter, then back at Lucy, and I could see the surprise registering in his expression. It was only there for an instant, hidden behind Lucy and Z as they traipsed out of the kitchen and into the lounge, but it was unmistakable. Simon stayed where he was, still fast asleep. Night, Bob, chanced Z. Enjoy your tea. I don't need tea, the black suit shouted. I nodded a good night at him and walked after the others, trying not to smile when I heard the scrape of ceramic and the fast, deep gulps that followed, echoing after me down the hallway. Something really sweet about the image of a big, bulky black suit drinking a little cup of tea. Speaking of which. Okay. Cruelty. And that's spelt cruelty. It's not another chapter about tea. It's not called cruelty. That would be a weird thing. Cruelty. Oh, sorry. Cruelty. So I'm gonna start laughing at my own joke in a minute, and I'm really sorry because it was such a rubbish joke. I'll do my best. It's a dad joke of a level 10 dad joke, basically, that one. Cruelty. I didn't remember falling asleep. Didn't even remember where I'd sat down to rest. But I must have fallen asleep because I was dreaming again. I was dreaming of the boy. He gazed down at me from a throne of corpses, their bodies stacked so high that I almost didn't see him perched on the top. The dead were dressed in clothes that should have belonged in a museum, and I noticed that some of them wore armour, sightless eyes peering out from beneath cone-shaped helmets. All carried horrific wounds, their blood pooled around the mound like a moat. When I looked to my left and right, I made out a battlefield filled with piles like this one, cairns of the countless dead. The boy himself, Alfred Furness, looked like he'd been bathed in blood. It coated every inch of skin, making his hair stand upright, slick with gore. And when he smiled at me, I could see it on his teeth. His eyes were empty wells, puncture wounds in his head, their depths endless. And yet I knew he was looking at me. "You did this?" I asked him, my voice whipped away by the wind. I tried to move just to see if I could, but like in my other dreams I was paralysed, stuck fast in the bloodied mud of the field. "You killed these people?" "They killed me first," he answered, and it was as if all the dead were speaking, their voices loud enough to crack the earth. He cocked his head, and it felt like a demon was watching me. "Is this a memory too?" I asked, thinking back to the visions I'd had of the orchard. Furness nodded. He wiped a hand across his face, mopping up the blood, and for a second he looked like a kid again, his features crumpled. Then those eyes came back into view, blazing darkness. "This was my life," he said, making my ears ring. But how could you do this?" I asked. Not that I needed to. I already knew. I could see the stranger's blood at work inside him, his veins so dark they looked like tattoos. He followed my line of sight. "He sacrificed his blood so that I could live," he said, and I knew he was speaking about the stranger in the orchard. "But he lives within me now. I can feel him there." But what was it, that thing?" I asked. Furness laughed, the sound of a soul tearing in two. "You don't need me to answer that." I shook my head, more bewildered than ever, trying to understand what he was saying. But all I could see were the faces of the dead, the people Furness had killed. There's so many of them," I whispered. "Not yet there aren't, but there will be." I felt the ground begin to shake like an earthquake. I turned as best I could, looking over my shoulder to see what I thought was a tidal wave surging across the field. Then I saw the figures in it, realised that it wasn't a wave but an army, hundreds of men charging this way. There was a grunt as Furness leaped off the mound of bodies, landing by my side and grabbing my face in his hands. His fingers burned, blood steaming from his superheated flesh, and there was no escaping his bear-trap grip. He forced me to watch as the army approached, 100 metres away now and closing fast. Most were holding spears, some had swords, others must have had bows because an arrow thumped into the soil close to where we were standing, more following, turning day to twilight. I struggled. I knew this was a dream, but it felt so real. If I didn't move now, then I'd be trampled to death or impaled upon 100 blades. "What are you doing?" I screamed, the men now 50 metres away, so close I could see the spittle flying from their howling jaws. "Let me go!"
"They cannot harm us," Furness said. "I will not let them."
And then he was off, running at the army, leaping into it with a cry that threatened to knock the heavens loose. A fountain of blood spewed up from the middle of the crowd, turning the sky red. It seemed to bleed into my vision, drowning the world in colour. But it didn't matter that I couldn't see. I was safe, now that Furness was here. The world fell silent, and I opened my eyes again. I was still inside the dream, but my location had changed. I was in a barn of some kind, straw on the floor, ancient farm equipment on the walls, moonlight streaming in through the single skylight. And I wasn't alone. There was a group of people here, 3 men and a woman. They were passing a jug between them, and they all looked drunk. Their flushed faces and toothless grins were directed at a shape on the floor, a small figure that curled into itself as they kicked and spat at it. It was a kid. My age, I think. His pale flesh covered in bruises. He was painfully thin, his brittle bones pushing against his parchment skin, his bird-wing shoulders shaking up and down as he cried. I tried to help him, feeling the nectar power up inside me, but I still couldn't move.
"We are so cruel,"
Furness said, and I turned my head to see him standing beside me, his body now clean of blood, watching the attack with his empty eyes.
"We hurt, and we kill, all for what?"
"Save him," I said, expecting the men and women to turn at the sound of my voice, to see me there. But they just howled their banshee screams at each other, delighted by their brutality.
"Would you save him?"
Furness asked. "Of course," I shouted back. "And I would have. I'd be saving him right now if the dream hadn't been holding me back."
"What if it's too late?"
"But it isn't too late." The 4 adults continued their drunken assault, even though the kid now lay still. The anger inside me surged, so much so that I almost managed to move a foot, the sheer force of the nectar shredding the dream. But Furness was already stepping forward, a throbbing, dog-like snarl emanating from his throat. The men and woman heard it, staggering away from the body on the floor. The jug dropped, shattering as they retreated, but there was nowhere to go. Furness knelt down beside the boy, lifting his head in his hands. He was still alive, but only just, and not for much longer. There could be no helping him. And suddenly I understood what Furness had meant when he'd asked me if I would save him. He hadn't been talking about protecting him from his attackers. He'd been talking about bringing him back. I watched as Furness pulled a knife from his belt, jabbing it into one of the charcoal veins in his wrist. A bead of tainted blood appeared, then another, and by the time the flow had started, he'd pressed his arm against the kid's mouth. The boy drank hungrily, sensing perhaps that this was the only way he could survive his injuries. I wanted to tell him to stop, but what choice did he have? Was death really better than this? Furness turned to me as the kid suckled from his wrist, the vortexes of his eyes burning with cold heat.
"Would you save him?"
he asked again, and even though I understood his true meaning, I still nodded. "Of course," I said, softer now. Furness smiled, and there was no malice there. He peered down at the kid, whose own veins were now beginning to pulse black.
"He reminded me of Joseph,"
he said. He pulled his wrist free, a plug of nectar already forming over the wound. The kid had drunk deep, however, thrashing on the hay-covered floor as the poison took control of his system. Furness held him tight, smoothing back his hair, brushing straw from his face.
So I made him my new brother.
The drunken woman made a break for it, her eyes like saucers as she bolted towards the door behind me. She didn't stand a chance. The kid sensed her movement, scrabbling up and throwing himself at her. He took her legs out with one swipe, sinking his teeth into her throat. He was on the move again before the first spurt of her blood could hit the floor, destroying the three men with ferocious, terrifying speed. When he'd finished, he scuttled back to Furness on all fours, gazing up at him the way a dog looks at his master, a look that was still heartbreakingly human. Furness took him in his arms again, holding him, the blood cooling around them. Then he looked at me once more, extending his other hand, welcoming me into the embrace. And it was a good thing that I couldn't move, because I would have gone to him. Furness smiled, and even as this dream began to fade, I heard him speak.
He was the first.
Another abyss of silent darkness, deep sleep, and then I was dreaming once more. This time I dreamed of the island. I hung over an ocean, the waters kicked up by the wind into a frenzy of churning silver blades. Above, the sky was so overcast that it could have been carved from rock, seeming to sink down as if to crush me. The island sat between the sea and the sky, a fist of rock whose sheer cliffs protected it from the onslaught of the elements. Perched on those walls of stone was a mansion whose crooked turrets rose like fingers towards the encroaching clouds. More than anything else, it reminded me of the Black Fort, the building that had plugged the only entrance to Furness Penitentiary. All around it were knuckled shapes, impossibly big, that prowled the cliffs and watched me with eyes of silver and black. Their forlorn cries were as loud as the pounding surf. I looked to my side, knowing I'd see Furness there. He was old now, much older, his face creased and wrinkled, his long beard flecked with grey. And yet I could still see the boy beneath the aged flesh. There was no mistaking the child that this had once been. I thought back to the last dream, already untangling like cotton threads in water. How many have there been? I asked, thinking of the boy in the barn. Furness's dark eyes never left the island, as though he was waiting for something to appear there.
Too many to count,
he said, his voice louder than the waves and yet still that same whisper.
Too many to remember.
Were they all like him? I asked. Like that first boy?
No,
Furness said.
Most were like him. They had a choice between death and something wonderful. You were like him.
I thought back, trying to peer into my own memories, but already I was forgetting the truth of what had happened to me. Would I have died in the prison if the warden hadn't chosen me, changed me? Probably. Furness's words knocked my train of thought off the rails.
Others were not. Others were happy in their old lives. They did not want to change.
And you forced them?
No more than any child is forced to grow up, to accept his responsibilities.
The ocean seemed to swell at the sound of his voice, giant waves breaking against the island's cliffs, drenching the mansion in mist and rainbows. Where is this place? I asked.
My home,
he answered. I looked back at him, at this boy locked inside an old man's skin. Why are you showing me this? You know what I'm going to do when I get here. I'm going to kill you. Furness inhaled, then turned to face me. Those eyes, or at least the place where his eyes should have been, burned black, like two gaping holes in the very fabric of reality. When he smiled, it was with sadness.
I know, Alex.
What do you mean? I demanded, trying to turn to face him, but unable to move the lower half of my body. My mind was just as rooted, unable to flow, to grasp what I was hearing. Tell me what's going on.
There's no time, he said. You have to go.
Go where? I said, frustration shunting me to the edge of tears. I don't understand.
Go now. It's not safe. They have come for you.
Who? I asked, looking around me. I don't see anyone. Furness reached up, his hands around my face once again. This time the pain of his searing flesh tore through my sleeping head, stripping the dream away. The waters of the bay rose, defying gravity, until all that remained in the churning void were two eyes, like whirlpools, and that timeless voice.
They are here.
I'll save the next chapter for tomorrow. It's called Reunion. Now, who could be chasing Alex? I wonder who is he going to bump into? Yeah, better do. Well, I should get through a few more tomorrow, though. Ooh, yeah, maybe we'll read 3 tomorrow and we'll get up to the next big chunk. Okay. I hope you enjoyed that. How could you not enjoy it? It was a chapter called Tea, and then a chapter called Cruelty. This is Friendly Tea. Anyway, I will see you tomorrow. I hope you have a really nice evening, whatever you're doing. Really nice afternoon, whatever time of day it is. And yeah, catch you tomorrow. See you then. Bye.